Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this edition of the Boston Healthcare Cloud Technology User Group. So we're super excited. We have a very special guest with us today who I'll introduce in just a moment. But first, what I'd like to do is go through a couple of introduction slides. So just a quick reminder, again, Boston Healthcare Technology Cloud Community. We're based out of the Boston area, but we like to say we serve a global community. Our two primary sponsors are Real Activity, who I can attest as a CEO takes enormous amount of pride in making this one of the pillar things that we do for the community. So we sponsor this event. We don't expect anything back from it. It doesn't really hit our target business audience. We're really just trying to build something and help some people at scale. And then, of course, Microsoft. Microsoft's just been an incredible sponsor, including letting us host the monthly meetings here in their amazing Boston office. And so just a little bit more about the group. Again, we're Boston Healthcare Cloud Technology Community. We're based out of the Boston area. The idea is that we provide world-class thought leaders in the technology and healthcare space to speak with the mission of trying to get as many folks will be for our Discord group.
Oh, there you go.
And so finally, I'd like to do a brief, just a quick introduction. I'm going to let Donna actually introduce herself. But it's an honor to have her take time out of her busy schedule to be here and talk to us today about engineering clinical apps for accessibility. One of the things I really like about Donna and excites me about having her present today is it seems a lot of what she works on is also skilling at scale and having an impact at scale. Whether that's in accessibility or Microsoft technologies, like I'll let her explain. Actually, I'll let her do the formal introduction. Actually, with that said, our food is arriving at the in-person meeting as well. So I'm going to use this opportunity to turn the meeting over to Donna. So remember, we have both the in-person and streaming presence for this meeting. So with that, Donna, thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much to Paul and Catalina for inviting me to speak with you all. I was just sharing before we started that I have been absolutely loving getting to know the different industry verticals, sectors, whatever we want to call it, lately, and figuring out what are the unique challenges that each of the industries have. So in healthcare, what are the unique challenges? What are the unique challenges in retail, government, et cetera? And after I've been doing a bunch of these studies and looking around and talking to people, I've realized there's a set of things, a set of principles and guidelines that are pretty common across all of them. And it really does take industry experts such as yourselves to take the basic guidelines and then tweak them to work for your industry. Today, I'd love to just share with you a bit of a story about a journey I've been on to learn about inclusive product development over the last many years. Let's say about a decade now. My mouse is being funny, so hang on 1 second. Okay. I'm going to assume you can see that. Okay. So first thing you'll see that I've got captions on at the bottom, that is a setting in PowerPoint. If you are using PowerPoint at all for any of your presentations, I highly recommend you do this. You go to just the PowerPoint ribbon, you click slideshow, and all the way on the right, there's a little checkbox that says turn on subtitles. You can switch it to be any language. I'm choosing English since we are mostly in the US right now. This helps for many reasons. One, for people who might be hard of hearing. Two, people who might be listening on low because they're paying attention to something else. Someone who might have ADHD and likes two different forms of content, so hearing the content as well as seeing it, as well as someone who may not speak English as their first language, and it's easier to read it rather than understand my accent. So I always turn on subtitles in my presentation, and 100% of the time, someone will come up to me after and say, thank you for doing that. I didn't know, and now I'm going to do it too. So just a pro tip for all of you who do presentations, it's a really good inclusive practice. So about a decade ago, I used to work on the HoloLens team. At Microsoft, we're working on version 1, and one of our target customers were JPL NASA. And we used to work with astronaut Scott Kelly, who was spending a year on the International Space Station. So he was using the HoloLens to do some repairs on the space station, and he would be sending us these beautiful images that he would take at night. We're a very insomniac team, so we were kind of around the clock working with our customers. And a lot of those images from space were very fascinating because no matter what hour of day those images arrived or when they were taken, you see lights on the planet, right? Of course, because half the planet is light, it's daytime, and the other half is not. And I was sitting there and thinking like, wow, there's, almost 8 billion people on Earth. And I've been so lucky where I've gotten to work with about 1.5 billion of them. Because at Microsoft, of course, we ship products to billions of people. Office, Windows, soon Azure, they ship over 1 billion people. Windows 10, I believe, is at 1.3 or 1.5 billion people. And a lot of this happens deliberately. We say, here are the audiences we want to target. But then after, a lot of it happens kind of by accident. And I started thinking, this was 2014, I started thinking, instead of it being by accident, what if we could proactively include more people in our research process, in our development process, in our testing process? So for about the last 8 years, I've been asking myself this question, and everything you're going to see today is my somewhat random and miscellaneous thoughts about this concept called inclusive product development. I don't call this inclusive design because it's not about the UX and the design phase. This is about the entire process of product development or experience development, right? Think about it. So whether it's a program you're putting together, an event, a process, a product, a digital product, hybrid work culture, whatever it is, thing development, how can you include more people into the shift left process into the beginning rather than trying to just figure out how it's going to work for them after? So the question I've been asking myself is, how would X humans find or use my product? And again, this is not some scientifically proven thing. This is what I've been using for 8 years for both technology and a bunch of personal side projects. And I'd love to share with you my thinking. So right now I work in accessibility, so I lead with this. There are over 1 billion people with disabilities in the world that we know of. This is mostly data taken from the US, Western Europe, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada, because that is where we tend to talk about disability openly. When you think about places like South America, Africa, and Asia, it's not a part of the daily conversation. They don't have a lot of laws around it. There's not a lot of focus on it. So I believe this number is quite skewed. When we think about disability, we of course think about folks who are blind, folks who are deaf, folks who use a wheelchair, folks who may have a speech impediment, but we don't think about people who are colorblind. And if there's men watching this, which I'm sure there are, 1 in 12 men are colorblind. And many don't realize that until later in life when they're trying to discern between red and green and realize they can't. This is a very, very common thing. And I hear about it all the time from my colleagues. Like, wow, I just learned I'm colorblind after 30 years. Very normal. The next thing that's become more and more common is becoming hard of hearing. We all listen to loud music in our youth with big headphones. And yes, now we're starting to lose our hearing. This is really common for drummers. I didn't realize that, but how many musicians are actually becoming hard of hearing. And this will be the next generation of Warby Parker, because the ADA in the US just passed a law saying that hearing aids can be made over the counter. So wait for a lot of hearing aid startups to show up. The 2 areas I'd like to talk about deep dive are cognitive and neural. Cognitive is what we think of when we say neurodiversity. This is folks who might have ADHD, like many of my colleagues, folks who might have autism, like many of my colleagues, or folks who may have dyslexia, like myself and many of my colleagues. These are things that, again, are getting diagnosed later in life because where many of us grew up, they may have not have diagnosed for many reasons, unawareness, lack of funds, etc. The other thing I'd like to talk about is neural, which I call mental health. This, I believe, will affect everybody at some point or another, whether it's a temporary condition like seasonal disorder. I'm in Seattle, you can see it's cloudy already. That deeply affects people in my life who fall into a depression from end of October till about May because the light changes and it really does affect mood. It could be a permanent thing like generalized anxiety. It could be a thing based on an event in your life, like postpartum depression. But I believe almost everybody will be touched by mental health, whether yourself or someone in your life at some point or another. These last 2 years of COVID, I'm sure you all have seen this over and over again with your communities. How many people are living with mental health in some way or another? So, given that there are so many people in the world who are impacted by disability, neurodiversity, and mental health, I actually believe that disability and accessibility affects 1 in 2 people. So for us to say, oh, it's a niche audience, we shouldn't even focus on it, is actually incredibly irresponsible. And it's not financially wise, because why would you cut out half the audience because you think it's a niche audience? I'm not saying you think that. Many people think thinking about accessibility is a niche audience and a nice to have, rather than something that makes a lot of business sense. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about me. This is me. I have dyslexia. I have a disability. It took me a long time to say these words. 10 years ago, there's no way you could have convinced me to be on camera saying this to a bunch of industry professionals who I respect. My world looks like this. On the slide, you'll see a line that has something that probably looks like gibberish to you. And the line below has a / that says, my world looks like this. To me, these both sentences look exactly the same. Dyslexia manifests itself in many ways. Some, the words jumble and they mix together like this. Others, you just see half the word this way or this way. For me, it's the letters themselves mix up. So it looks like one of those puzzles where you can read this even though the letters are all mixed up. One of those puzzles, except that's my entire life. I didn't know the world didn't actually look like that till I was diagnosed. So I want to talk to you about some guidelines, principles, practices, suggestions that we are working on at Microsoft as part of our inclusive design toolkit around mental health guidelines and neurodiversity. For mental health, we want to focus on things like protecting the user's attention. So we want to make sure users can absorb incoming information without being alarmed by inflammatory messages, like click this or you will lose your data. That sort of thing, not helpful. It triggers just reaction in people that you're not looking for. People are like, take action now. That may work, or it may cause people to really not like you. Second is directing users to something actionable. Be clear about what you want people to do next. This is where the call to action versus here's information, like, what do I do here? Just be clear. And the third thing around mental health is allow people to customize how they want. So customize as much as possible. Remove these bars on the side. See this across 5 pages. Be able to have this font be bigger, etc. For neurodiversity, a lot of the mental health guidelines also apply, but also simplifying. So users are able to keep track of what they're doing and how long it should be doing. I'm sure you've seen those sites where it says time to read at the top. I think Medium does it. They were one of the first to say article time to read 5 minutes. I love those. Those are fantastic because it tells me I can consume this quickly, or I should put aside time later to do it. So again, those are just starting. We'll have a lot more to share on that next year once we have some product truth and some real examples. But those are the principles or suggestions that we're starting to look at. My friend Dave Dame, who's the director of Surface at Microsoft, Surface Hardware, has the best quote around it. He says, we're all going to be disabled someday, just some of us beat you to it. And it's so true. And those of you who work in healthcare know this better than anyone. If we're lucky enough to live that long, we will develop a disability in some way. And given that we are all control freaks, let's build the world that we are going to want to live in while we still have these positions of power and authority. So when we're developing for an audience, right, whether it's disability or another thing, we can focus on building for and with specifically targeted to, or it can be a targeted to and. So I'll walk you through 2 examples. So Kim Kardashian's, I can't believe I'm using Kardashians in a professional presentation, but let's see. Kim Kardashian's, I guess it's lingerie line, Skims, they introduced adaptive collection for people with limited mobility. So folks who might use a wheelchair, folks who might have limited mobility in any of their limbs. And this underwear, it like has snaps in extra places and all of this stuff. So it's not like a process to put the thing on. This is specifically targeted toward people with disabilities. People who do not have a disability probably wouldn't benefit from this. Contrary to this is something that is targeted toward non-people with disabilities, but it is also good for people with disabilities. I just found this example over the weekend. I got a targeted ad, because ads know me, These are a pair of one-leg tights. So on one side of the tights is a pair of shorts, on the other side are tights. I'm thinking, those are cool. Wonder if they're for someone who has an amputation, because that's where my mind goes. I have a friend who has an amputation. I was thinking, she's going to love these. But when I looked into the company, they're not actually focusing on disability. They're looking at counterculture and social groups from the 90s. So it's a kind of punk culture, one-leg tights, but they would also be really good for someone who has an amputation, or somebody who has any sort of like skin issue on one of their legs. So I thought this was a really good example of what we called a curb cut. Curb cut are those slanty things on sidewalks that let wheelchairs, originally, that's why they were designed, to easily go from sidewalk to road. But actually, this is really useful for everybody. In this picture, I'm pushing my nephew, Caden. I do not have children, so I'm not good at strollers. I didn't understand how to shovel this ginormous stroller off of a sidewalk, but turns out the answer is curb cuts. They're really great for people carrying boxes, pushing strollers in wheelchairs, etc. Designed for people with disabilities, but also good for everyone else. So there's so many examples of curb cuts in the world, and I'm not going to go into it too much, but generally, if you design for disability, it winds up being really useful for everybody. Like the first audiobooks were invented for blind Americans in the 30s, and now all of us, not all of us, but many of us use Audible and audiobooks when we're driving, walking on the treadmill for endless hours. If you're dyslexic, Audible is really great. So you don't have to consume books like that. You hear it at 2.5 speed and really be able to absorb what my friends who, and I'm sure you all know the history of typewriters, SMS, and internet. They were all designed by people, designed with and for people with disabilities to solve a specific communication problem. But now, of course, we all use them. I was telling Paul and Carolina, I will talk about this forever, so I will not take up the entire hour talking about accessibility, but I want to move on to some other areas. So one is, of course, people with disabilities, neurodiversity, mental health is an audience to consider. The second audience to consider are people with different power and connectivity standards. On the left here is a tweet from my colleague at Microsoft, Homa Lemo, who is talking about the load shedding situation in South Africa. They have had some bad power outage situations where they have power for 3 hours a day. And for someone who's trying to work a tech job, especially in advocacy, that is a challenge. And this is South Africa, where it's fairly developed. People live very good lives, and people have hard tech jobs. So it's so challenging to think about, how would I design a product for different power and connectivity standards when I'm just unaware of what that looks for? Is it internet connectivity? Is it laggy network? It's important to know where your audience is and which audience you want to serve and what their power and connectivity might look like. When I was doing a lot of work with a thing at Microsoft called the Insider Program, I spent quite a bit of time in Lagos, Nigeria, and realized, oh, the power and connectivity here is highly variable. So I had to keep my laptop charged at all time because power may go out for 6 hours a day, unknown to me. Same with elevators. So I learned to wear flat shoes and be able to run up and down stairs pretty quickly. I just saw this example of power and connectivity that I wanted to show you in learn.microsoft.com, which is our documentation site. So learn.microsoft.com. At the bottom of a bunch of documentation, I was looking into the Cloud Solution Center, like you all work with Cloud for Healthcare. You can download the PDF of the documentation. This is so if you happen to have limited connectivity, you don't need to have internet to be able to read this docs. You can just have the PDF locally on your phone or on your laptop. I thought that was a good inclusive design practice, and I wanted to call that out. Third thing to think about is, are you offering your thing, whatever it is, are you offering your thing in a certain country, a region, a culture, or language? Ironically, culture actually matters more than country or language. Like, for example, many companies have recently suspended sales in Russia. That is a choice. And that's something to think about. Where do you sell your product or offering? Where is it available? And it's very important to make this choice deliberately, because if you're not thinking about it deliberately, then by accident, you're going to be excluding people without realizing. One big eye-opening thing that happened to me, I was spending quite a bit of time in Jakarta, and I started talking about some of these topics around mental health and neurodiversity. And everybody in the audience looked at me in shock and horror because you don't talk about mental health in Asia openly. It's not a done thing. I got a big pass because I'm an American, but I lost my audience when I talked about it that way. I had to change my language and verbiage to be wellness, productivity, completely different language. I could not give this exact same talk in Asia. Race, gender, of course, a big topic in the world, and I won't, fixate too much on all of the different, conversations around race and gender and all of these things. But the main thing is to keep in mind, where are you planning to offer your product, and what is normal, accepted to be able to share there. One thing I'll tell you, when I was working on HoloLens, we measured heads because we realized the initial device really only worked for one kind of head that was much wider than me. And initially we had the device being able to be adjusted this way only, but we realized we had to adjust this way because many heads are like, I don't want to say flatter, but flatter this way or that way. So important to actually test with different race, different gender, especially if you're building anything that needs like skin color or like body size to factor. I run a fashion line, so this is pretty important to me. Another company that did something interesting recently was Band-Aid. You may have seen this, where there's skin color Band-Aids. And so many people were saying, oh, I didn't realize Band-Aids were supposed to match your skin color. I finally feel seen after so many years. I actually hadn't realized that either, but it was cool to see Band-Aids in my skin color too. So age range and end of life. We are quite fixated with Gen Z and whoever comes after Gen Alpha, I guess. But we don't actually think a lot about end of life. And it is morbid, but we will all die at some point. So what happens with the things we have bought, the services we've subscribed to? Is there an end of life of that? Is there a way to opt out of it? Or do our family members have to hack into our accounts? I keep hearing this over and over saying, have your loved ones have their passwords in like a sticky note in the drawer or in a safe somewhere. There's no great solutions right now that everyone uses. And I believe this is the next generation of technology we need to think about. Again, people don't want to talk about this because it's not uplifting, but it is a reality for 100% of people on Earth. I think this is Signal. They have an interesting option in their settings saying, if you're away for X much time, delete the account. And I wish more apps and services had that. Like if unused for X much time, prompt and then delete. Economic condition and tech literacy. So these are different. I put them together because I'm talking too much. Economic condition, I will share with you my thought process around it, but it's really important to think through, am I giving enough offers for people who might have different economic conditions rather than only focusing on premier or only focusing on mid-tier? Tech literacy and just literacy in general has been a topic I've been thinking about a lot lately, because much of the documentation I write for my technology assumes very high tech literacy. And some of the products we work on at Microsoft, the Power Platform, for example, is specifically made for people who do not come from a traditional tech background. And many of the things that you all work on, you know that you need to create your solutions for people who may not be college educated. And that's not good or bad. It's just a fact. I liked this framework from the Gates Foundation, where they talk about economic condition and what is the most expensive thing you can afford to commute in. Okay, so if the most expensive thing you can afford to commute in are shoes, that price point and the offering will be very different. And if the most expensive thing are bicycles, or if the most expensive thing are cars. So think about which audience you're really trying to serve and make sure your price point and your offer is catered toward that audience. I grabbed these screenshots yesterday because I knew I'd be talking to a medical audience. If you go to plainlanguage.gov, you will get a lot of information on how to use plain language. And I believe we should all be using plain language more, especially all of you who are extremely educated people, trying to translate what you know into activities and actions for people. So let me read you a before of this Medicaid eligibility. Medicaid, apply if you are age 65 years and older, blind, disabled, low income, and few resources. Apply if you're terminally ill, receive hospice services. Apply if you're age, blind, disabled, live in a nursing home, low income. So much jumble O text, not good for mental health, not good for people who just do not cannot parse that many words. Instead, after in plain language, you can say, you may apply for Medicaid if you are terminally ill, eligible, 65 years, live in a nursing home, live in a nursing home. Simple. Make it simple for people. One other tool I've been using a lot is Grammarly. I just put the plugin in Edge. You can put it in whatever browser you have, I think. And it helps you just write simpler. And you can see that you can choose the readability level and say what grade or level of education you want the readability of it to be. And it'll highlight things and give you a score. So this helps keep me in check when I'm getting a bit too fancy, when I really need to keep my documentation simple so people read it first. And second, people understand it to take action. I'm losing my voice. So this is a screenshot. If you're going to take a screenshot, this is the one to take. Again, this is not a comprehensive list, but these are some considerations that I keep in mind. I actually have this printed here. Whenever I'm designing anything, whether it's a program, a tech solution, a documentation, a new piece of fashion, I work through some of these to consider what I'm forgetting. So given all these considerations, those are the 6 categories of humans I think about. But there are 3 questions I ask myself. Who am I intentionally excluding? Because for many of the things that I work on, I am intentionally excluding people, and that is okay. You don't need to build for every single person on the planet. You can say, this specifically is not for non-tech people, or this specifically is not for people who don't work in healthcare. You just say, once you're intentional about it, then it just frees you up to spend all your energy on the audience that you are very intentionally including. The next question I think is actually more important. This is a picture of my colleague Ann Taylor showing Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, how to use a tool called Seeing AI that uses Azure Cognitive Services to look at the world around you and say out loud what you're seeing. So this would be, women giving presentations with enthusiastic hands. So many people get unintentionally excluded because we just don't think about it. So when you're building anything, go through the categories of people and say, have I considered? Not have I built for, but have I considered? And once you could say, yes, I've thought through this and I've decided to include or exclude on purpose, then you're doing it, right? You are doing inclusive product development because you're being intentional about what you're trying to deliver and to who. And the third thing I'd love for you to keep in mind is think about how you can shift left one step in your inclusion, okay? So if you think about the steps of a thing development, right? Experience development to be, you research, you're like, does this thing need to exist? You draw things on a board, come up with ideas and brainstorm with people. Then you actually design and say, here's the workflow, here's how to look. Then you develop, build the thing. Then you test with some audience, hopefully, ask some people, etc. Then you deploy, send to lots of people and have lots of people adopt it, use it, etc. Then you're hopefully getting customer feedback and then you're working on the next version. You want to make sure that your target audience is factored into all of these. Ideally, your target audience is there with you at the research phase. But if you're not there yet, say your target audience is really only there at the deployment phase, think about how you can include them in the testing phase. Think about shifting left one step. Don't worry about, oh, I haven't even thought about my target audience, or this slightly, marginalized audience. Let me think about it at research. That might be challenging because you may not have the funding, the time, the resources, but you can shift left one step. And I believe if you shift left one step every time you do this, then you'll be really being much more inclusive at the research phase about these categories of humans. It can be pretty overwhelming to try to do all these at once, so I don't do that. Instead, I'm going to just give you an example from my fashion line. I think about how my offering can be tailored toward people one thing at a time. Like for example, right now I'm really focusing on people with disabilities because of the work I do. So I am going to think about building for folks who have amputations in the ideation phase. I will co-create with that audience. And I've done this for one person and it was a wonderful experience. So I'm going to try to offer that more as a customization service. I'm thinking about power and connectivity, like how can I reach people like that? Maybe pop-ups, a point of sale system. What about country, language, and culture? What about modest fashion for women from the Middle East? Race, gender, I've gotten a lot of asked to do gender neutral things, which I'm happy to do. Age, end of life. A lot of older folks have said, I would love sleeveless, which is interesting. So older folks say, I'm buff, I work out, I want to show off my arms. Okay, that's cool. And then economic and tech literacy. For economic power, a lot of people said, we can't exactly afford your pieces, but we love the print. So I said, okay, let's do some lower cost bags or something, a little more simple that doesn't cost a lot of money to build. My fashion line, just to fill you in, it's all tailored here in Seattle, Washington, where I live, by Afghani refugee women. So they're able to create economic power for their family, send their kids to school, pay their rent by doing something that they're good at already, which is sewing. So we pay Seattle wages for our Afghani ladies, and many of them have become the primary breadwinner of their family. So that's something that we're pretty proud of. So I've got some case studies around developers and IT pros, just factoring in like, okay, if you're building an app, does this work with a screen reader? How does this work offline? Is it available for download in Russia? What's the age limits? Who put the documentation? Where to put the documentation? What reading level? Same thing for an IT admin. And the third one would be a project leader rolling out a mental health program. Like, what do you do about folks who have a diagnosed mental health condition? Can these resources be available offline? Mental health is a taboo topic in Asia. This was me. So these are exactly my questions. What are some men's mental health topics to cover? Because men's mental health is a big topic. Would this be available for folks under 18? A lot of child liability things. And then economic power. Are we assuming enough income to find therapy? What free options are there? So those are some of my real life programs. I have homework for you. I would love for you to keep in mind 3 things when you're building anything. Okay. Who are you intentionally excluding? Because that's okay. Who are you unintentionally excluding? Because that can come back to, bite you because you just didn't think about it. And 3, how can you move up inclusive thinking one phase in your process? Please get in touch with me on Twitter and LinkedIn. I'm Dona Sakar. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, Donna, that was just amazing. Thank you so much. And so for folks that are watching this video after the fact, I encourage you to do a quick search on Donna, and you can find her on LinkedIn. We don't spend a lot of time doing introductions because we only have 30 minutes, and I'd like to think that many of the names we invite to speak sort of speak for themselves, no pun intended. But I do encourage you to just to do some quick homework. It's really an honor to have Donna today. And Donna, I think in closing, what I'd like to point out is that one of the things I really enjoy about this presentation is that I'm particularly passionate about patient access. And so in short, I think of patient access as really anything that hinders or optimizes humans' abilities or people's ability to get access to health, right? And
Yes.
so that's a pretty wide spectrum of stuff, if you will, right? And so here's a quick statistic. So 55% of unnecessary hospitalizations in rural areas, I use the rural number because it's higher, but it's significant in urban areas as well, could have been prevented had it been for improved access to healthcare. And so this could be any number of things. A patient couldn't use a portal because they didn't have the accessibility options. Somebody didn't know how to put a healthcare system together. You mentioned the Cloud Solutions Center. That's where we install and deploy Microsoft Cloud from healthcare. I'm actually teaching the MCTs how to do this, and I'm embarrassed. I didn't even know that was there. That was such a huge thing that I learned from this. I can't wait to share this, with the other MCTs that are using that Cloud Center. And, and then this thirdly, the touch on, neurodiversity and the mental health issues. This is extremely important, especially in the U.S. One of the things I'm very thankful for is that our government, the folks at B, have extended the coding for mental health issues to be remote, right? So prior to the pandemic, that didn't exist. And unfortunately, there's a large part of hospitals that operate like a business. They have to, right? And so they tend to focus on things that they can get paid on. And again, that's not people being bad things. Sometimes that's just systematic and the way the business goes. But my point is that, boy, if you have a code that people can get paid on, it seems like people tend to offer it a lot more, And so we're seeing this, this push towards remote care, hybrid care for these, neurodiversity and mental health issues. And so I love the touchdown there as well. As a matter of fact, we're very passionate about that with Industry Cloud as well. That's amazing. So anyway, I appreciate all your time. We've already run over, but I just wanted to call out those very specific things that I was just so thankful to hear in your presentation. And like always, it's an honor, to see you remotely this time. I saw you last week at the Power Platform Conference, and I hope our paths cross again.
So yeah, I love it. Thank you so much, Dona.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy your dumplings, Paul.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye.
Bye.